Welcome to the Vibrant Life podcast. I'm Sarah Nolan, a burnout prevention and energy management consultant, and I'm here with Danielle Lynn, who is a shamanic practitioner and an author of two amazing books. The first one's called 27 Soul Perspectives, and the other one's called Eclipse of Consciousness. And we're going to share those links at the end, but I'm super excited to have you here, Danielle, because Danielle's got an incredible story of transformation having to do with polar opposite relationships that I think a lot of you will be able to relate to, going from a relationship where she was chasing a vision that she thought she wanted instead of her true desires. And this was more of an inauthentic and toxic relationship. And then she stepped into a relationship where, she and her husband are able to stand in their wholeness and come together as a team. And that's, when I talk with people about their ultimate intentions for relationships, that's the kind of thing that people talk about that they really desire. So Danielle, thank you so much for being here today and sharing this powerful story with us and helping the audience to be able to transcend whatever patterns they may have been in relationships and step into what they really want.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, an honor to share this. So as I share it, with all of you, I'm going to really focus on having very open-hearted share. And, I invite you all to kind of walk beside me through the journey, because there's so many nuances to an experience that, can seem to not be conveyed by words. But I think if we all sit with this with a really open heart, the translation will be complete.
Exactly. So just be present, and whatever feelings come up for you as Danielle's sharing, just allow yourself to be with those feelings. And I feel like this is the kind of story where people are able to experience that transformation and create these shifts. And with interviews like this, I'd encourage you to, listen to it again, and you're going to get something new out of it every time you listen to it. And it really is an experience. So yeah, just be with the experience, and thank you for joining us. So Danielle, can you talk about how this started? You've got a little bit of a unique situation where you don't have a history of toxic relationships. So how did you get into this one in particular?
Well, I would say it came from a desire I had to be seen by another. Mm-hmm. And even without a history of toxic relationships, I feel it very prevalent in my own self that I really wanted to be seen, to be felt as worthy by another. It was very challenging for me, growing up, and when I was younger especially. And, even right now, I still process experiences of that. I'll still look at that and go, oh, I remember that feeling. Mm. It's an evolving journey. But there was this feeling of my own love for myself at the time didn't feel like enough. I felt like I needed to see it reflected through someone else. I needed, confirmation outside of me that I was worthy, that I was lovable. And I'm able to give a voice to it because at the time, I'm not certain I would have described it that way. I think I would have just described it as nothing felt more alive than having someone else look at me and tell me they loved me, and there was, in my life, I had very loving parents. In my experience, it was a very loving childhood that encouraged a lot of my unique attributes. But they were parents who focused a lot on spiritual aspirations, on meditation and things like that. And, as such, through the period growing up, sexuality was thought of as something to be transmuted into meditation. That was, yes, sex, but that's a lower base experience. We want to transmute it to something higher. But as a young girl and as a teenager, I was just brimming with sexual energy, this beautiful, vibrant, wanting to strut my stuff, sexual energy. And it was beautiful to me, but it was also a very confusing experience because I was really being told that I was supposed to do something else with that energy when all that energy wanted to do was grab, the nearest, cutest guy and give him a big smooch and, strut around. I mean, in my current state, I have so much love for that aspect of me because she had this beautiful, vibrant sexual energy that was really just looking for an outlet. It was looking for an expression. And again, while my parents were very, very loving people, I don't think either of them really had a template either on, how to express this. So, this leads me up to finding, the first partner that I'm speaking about here. And what drew me into that situation, I believe, part of what drew me in that situation was the intensity I felt. I think many of us have experienced relationships that ultimately maybe weren't the ones we wanted to stay in, but we got in from the intensity. Oh my goodness, the feeling of it, right?
Right.
And I had this intense feeling, we had an incredible sexual chemistry. And it felt, for me at the time, a young girl, felt so freeing and so, open to express this. And as such, I sort of dove in head first. And, from the very beginning, there were red flags.
And those red flags are so important to notice. And for people who are watching and listening right now, take a moment and notice if you have ever seen those red flags in previous relationships or right now, if there are red flags.
Yes. And for me, those red flags came in the form of subtle manipulations and maybe not so subtle. And,
what kind of manipulations are you speaking of?
Manipulations such as when I wanted to establish a boundary, like if I said, well, I don't know if I don't feel like driving over there to see you today. The manipulation might be, oh, well, then I guess you don't really like me, or, like whatever, these kinds of, and, remembering that they're subtle, they start subtle enough that they almost make you question your own choice. Well, of course I like him, and I'm not showing this, and I'm not doing that. And I have found the most sinister manipulations play off a worry that you may have about how you are as a partner, or who you are, or your worthiness, or all these other things.
And they don't always seem mean. Like one of the things I hear from people all the time is like, they're so sweet, or they're so kind. How could they possibly be manipulating me? Because it's so subtle. And I think a lot of these people don't realize that they're manipulating. It's just like they're just kind of reacting based on what they feel. And so it can just be so subtle. But then when you look at it as like, okay, what are the red flags? And do I feel that, like what you were just talking about, how your emotions are kind of being played and you start to question yourself. That is what the patterns that I have seen with people, is when they start to question their own thinking when they're with a person.
Yes. And very well put. And, the challenge being, I was also a very headstrong woman that, wanted to, when I decided something was going to work, it was going to work. And, you combine that for me with this unwillingness to be, I didn't want to be wrong about my choice. Because the other thing about this specific relationship was this was a relationship where it was the first time I had sex.
Mm-hmm.
So that had big meaning for me at the
Yeah.
time. That had great meaning. And to me, what, started to happen was, again, initially it was just boundary disrespecting. If I wanted time for myself, it was met with a lot of oh, like, why aren't you wanting to spend time with me? And, it wasn't upfront, it was one of those things where you didn't feel very black and white about it. You felt almost like, well, am I being unreasonable? And I think that's one of the biggest slippery slopes we can fall into. I will make a comment, is a sort of jumping a bit, but I will make a comment that because of, in a big part because of this experience, I was able to start to discern what in a relationship, what is a non-negotiable, what is a complete boundary for me, and what is something that's more of a preference, something that I enjoy, but if I was like, you know what, that's okay, we don't need to have this right now. And so this to me was learning the healthy differences and allowing myself to be the root and the foundation of that, not seeking another person to tell me whether that was appropriate or not.
Right.
And I believe that was, so speaking of that, I believe that was one of the greatest challenges in this relationship, because I was other affirming, meaning I was looking outside of me for the affirmation of being okay inside. And when I was doing that, I was giving my power away. I was giving my power away not only to another person, but to another situation. And when I was doing this, it cascaded, through the time I was with him. Like I said, it started with these little things. And what's really important to note is, he would do nice things like, I bought you this entire game system you wanted with your favorite game. Oh, I got you this or that. Through my entire relationship with him, he always called me beautiful. There was never one time, even in the arguments, where he never, so it was one of those things where it's like, well, he's always called me beautiful. And there's certain consistency that would be there. But, what I would discover through the course of my relationship with him was, this was a person who was later diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. We found out at the very, very, very end of the relationship, but through the relationship, there was a lot of what I would almost describe as trauma bonding, a lot of trauma bonding with heightened emotions and tearful moments and almost coming apart, but then crying and coming together. And, through this whole experience, even in retrospect with this experience, I have, through my healing, a lot of empathy for this person here and now. But it gave me a greater understanding of how important it was for me to be grounded in myself first before engaging in a relationship, because, his problem situations, experiences were his own, but then I made them mine.
Right.
I was like, no, this is mine too. And I, through the course of that experience, it really wore me down. Here, I was with this person for about 5 years, and through the course of this experience, there was a period of time when I would almost look at myself. I didn't even recognize myself. It was like being almost like a shell of a person, And I know it's easy for us to immediately point, well, this person did it to me and this and that. But I'm a big person on taking personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And I am personal responsibility from an empowered place, from a place of self-empowerment. Because I can trace through that entire situation every single place that I made the choice to either continue a relationship, or I made a choice, even if I, and there's a lot of compassion here, because I understand that at these different points of making these choices, I may have felt like I had no other choice.
Right.
I may have felt crazy for making a different choice. And this was even compounded more challenging for me because through the course of this relationship with him, we had 2 children together.
Mm.
And, this was something where I felt it was essential to have, well, we have to stay together. So as it was getting, more and more worse, and by worse, really what was happening at the end of the day was, he was not participating as a team with me. He was not staying employed. It was like I was raising 3 children.
Yeah.
Essentially. But in the back of my mind, I'd say, well, it wasn't that bad. And ironically,
famous last words, it is not that bad. That's one of those red flags where, there are red flags where you can look at the other person, but then there are red flags that you can see within yourself. Do you find yourself saying or thinking those words, it's not that bad, or it's going to be, it's fine. Like, it's fine. It's the worst.
Yes, that's a challenging one. And, you say, well, it's not that bad. It's not that this, or, oh, we need to have a nuclear family, or the kids need their father. But I remember near the end, it was getting so bad where, I was putting the kids in, I had at that time, created a whole career for myself, because almost out of sheer will, because I was like, well, I need, and it's funny that the strength that we can show during these times in some way, aspects of our life, because we almost rise to the occasion. But, I was like, okay, well, I'm making all the money for the entire family. I'm getting I'm putting the kids in daycare. I am, and I was able to create all of this. And yet it was very funny, because it was the partner I had chosen to be with had chosen such a path of destruction that he went ahead and he cheated in the relationship. And then, I had found out. And that was a very big breaking point for me, because it was just this point where you could write, at least for me, where I could write off so many things. But, it was almost like looking at myself saying, what am I really fighting for? He's not, I'm not even able to point to, wow, he's being an amazing father with the kids here. It's just, what is this that I'm fighting for? And in speaking to him from my heart, and speaking to him and crying and telling him, like, how could this have happened? He punched me.
Yeah.
He punched me. And this was shocking to me, because in the first time in 5 years, like, he had done that. Like, in the past, he had signs, like, where he would, he had broken things before. He had, and this is, again, things that I learned after the fact, signs of someone, potentially being abusive.
Can you tell more about those signs?
Yes. Impulsive behavior. There was a lot of impulsive behavior, like impulsive, and even impulsive purchasing, impulsive. He would suddenly, be interested in, like, oh wait, turmeric's the new thing. So he would buy like a pound of turmeric, and suddenly everything had turmeric. It was almost like over exaggerated, over impulsive behaviors. That might seem benign in some ways, but, like, he would also constantly want to spend money, or constantly want to buy things every day. He would not be able to talk or discuss things. So in a relationship, having a space, having a platform where you can both share your perspectives is very essential. And if I was trying to share my perspective, he would either not listen or shut down. So there was no actual two-way communication there. Let me think. What else was there? When discussions started to get more heated, I remember one time he, like, grabbed a bottle of maraschino cherry syrup and just threw it against the wall near where I was standing.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember for a long time, I would write this off and just go, oh, well, because, we knew he had some challenges, some mental emotional challenges. But the thing that I write it off as, well, he never actually, he's not trying to hurt me. He's just, um, it's too much for him. He just needs help. He did see like a psychiatrist or psychologist at one point. So I'm like, okay, well, he's getting help for himself. But reflecting on the pattern of it, reflecting on the pattern of this experience, there was, if I was willing to be truly, truly honest and objective about the situation, I could see that a lot of the things that I thought I was witnessing that were changes or growth were really just placating patterns. Mm-hmm. Placation for me to try and just keep the cycle going. There wasn't actually a drive or a desire that he had to shift.
Right.
And, the big thing I had learned was not that it's not my job or even in my ability to change another person.
Right.
And I think this could be a big lesson for any of us, whether in relationships or anything else. The sovereignty, I was learning that we must respect the sovereignty of each human being we come in connection with. But at that same token, we also must respect our own sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And I learned through that healthy relationships aren't about diminishing my own sovereignty or placing my sovereignty on the side to try and honor someone else's sovereignty. And I know I'm using this word a lot, so I'll say it another way. Honoring the core of who I am, honoring the me. I sometimes visualize this when I'm loving myself and taking care of myself. If I was my own child and I wanted to show my own child how to behave in the world around me, what to say yes to, what to say no to, what would that look like? Would I tell my child, oh, you really must just, you got to take this. Oh yeah, you should just hang out this person, write it out. It's all, it's all good. Like, what would I say, to my child? And more importantly, how would I be if I could show them a blueprint of what it is to love myself?
Yeah.
To say
this is something that I like to do with my clients when we kind of go back to the drawing board with relationships. And a lot of people don't know what they actually deserve in a relationship or what a relationship should look like. But it can, just like what you said, it can make it a little bit easier to see that if you say, okay, imagine yourself as like a 5-year-old child. How would you like their father, friend, loved one to treat them? And just like picture this innocent 5-year-old in front of you and say, what do they deserve? And that's what you deserve too.
That's really beautiful. I love that. That's very resonant with what I came to find in my own life.
Yeah, well. Sounds like it. And I just took some notes on what you just said so we can share it a little bit later. So what, when you had these realizations about honoring who you are, how did you come to that? Because it sounds a very different place than where you were initially. So how did you make that transition?
Well, near the very end of the relationship, near the very end of the experience, it was interesting because I'm gonna recollect these steps with you because, in the forefront of my mind, it almost just felt like a shattering of illusions. That was started by, I think all of us have a tipping point. All of us have a point when when we can no longer really write something off as acceptable or anything like that. And for me, that tipping point happened around that point that I told you right there. And, we're just no longer able to write things off. And it reminds me of pulling on a piece of string where, you pull it and things are starting to unravel a little bit. Right. And, in that process of unraveling, it was interesting to witness because I believe, at around this time, what happened after this point is immediately just started he must have noticed something shifted, because something immediately shifted in me. And it was like I was, still reeling or still in shock, and
this is after he started getting physical.
And the one punch was what he did, and that's all it took for me, right. Really. Yeah. I'd love to say that I immediately packed my bags and left, but what I did was I just almost checked out completely. Mm-hmm. I was in shock.
Mm-hmm. And when you have children, it adds this whole other dynamic.
It does. And I'm grateful at the time that they weren't even in the house. I believe they were with family at the time, mm-hmm. But what ended up happening was within a very short span, he discovered that I was no longer responding the same. I think he could sense that something was unraveling, because that begun the process of unraveling, right. Where I was just going very internal and almost, it's like I wasn't responsive mm-hmm. to the stuff I used to be responsive to. And it got to a point where I think over the course of a week, he had been like either checking in with me or trying to figure out like what was going on. I said, well, I think I told him, I said, I think I'm done. Mm. And, I think he didn't believe it at first, or he was laughing, but then through the course of the night, like, I think he realized like none of the old buttons were working. Mm-hmm. And, he pulled out a knife, to use supposedly on himself. Like, he held one of those big chef knives and he was mm-hmm. gonna, hurt himself. And I talked him down, and I was able to call the authorities, who then came, and he mm-hmm. got, involuntarily placed in a mental, hospital situation. Which, I was able, like, it was a very tense situation. Yeah. And I think that was like the further catalyst, because it's like, how could I allow something that dangerous to be around me and my children? Right, how could I allow that to happen? And I'm not saying that it's like a blame myself, but it's like that. It's like
a wake-up call.
Yeah, that trumps everything. Mm-hmm. And it was very funny, because then almost with him out of the space, it almost started to feel relief almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And it was like things were being unwound, things were being, it was like the spell was broken. Mm-hmm. A little bit like that. And that being said, I do understand, even then it can be challenging, even knowing all these things. There's the part of you that was looking for the partner you thought you had, or the one that you thought you had in your mind. And I realized at that point, I started to cry and grieve, because I was grieving for the partner that I thought that I had.
Yeah.
And all, this construct that I almost believed that I had. And this was a deep grief process, because it was like a death.
Yeah. And that can be so confusing with that kind of a situation, because there's a part of you that might question that grief. And it's like, what am I doing? I should be angry. I should be anything but grieving. And so to allow yourself that process is incredible. And for people who are, watching and listening, if you're going through something similar, this is a sign to, allow yourself. And if this is in the past and you never went through that grieving process, allow yourself to go there and to experience that, so that you can move forward to new levels.
Yes. And, something I want to say is, it was almost like I was given for me, I'm a person who believes in a lot of gray in the world, there's mm-hmm. a lot of spectrums there, but I was given such almost a black and white situation, for me, like for
Right.
me personally and for my boundaries, that even through all that time, you sometimes can feel almost crazy because there's the part of you that either misses them or
Right.
is like, what, like, well, can I fix this? And
Right.
you feel almost crazy for thinking that.
Right.
And I want to affirm that, if someone is going through this, or, it doesn't even have to be that extreme.
Right.
And I think that's the funny thing. We can experience this to different degrees. My own story is fairly extreme, but for me, that was enough to completely break that pattern for me, that I did not look to interact with another partner in that way again, not at any level, because we can have levels that are more like, I want to almost call them tolerable, like the difference between having a continuous little static shock versus holding on to like a 10,000 volts, right? Like,
Right. And I mean, the fact that you had this level of awareness as a coach consultant perspective in just working with other people, that is what I see is what helped you to shift so profoundly, because you had the awareness to then make the learn from that experience and then go out and make different decisions. And so that's incredible that you've had the awareness, and people can access that awareness at any time. And I think this is one of those moments for people who are tuning in to just take a moment. You can even pause the video or the audio and just contemplate, just reflect, and bring this awareness into your experience so that you can have some of these shifts as well.
yes.
All right. Go for it.
I love that. Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's such a beautiful way of exploring this. And so through that, through that whole experience, and the depth of this is just a completely another story. And which is why I want to say, for a lot of people, it might feel challenging because there might be, fear of what happens, through that experience. And I will say that I felt so deeply grounded in what I chose to do. I could feel how much it resonated with me to make those shifts in my life. All the same, what ended up happening, through that experience is, as I was making all these transitions, out of this partnership, out of this situation, at the same time, his parents, or rather, his mother, who I also later found out essentially had a narcissistic borderline personality disorder, at the time saw her opportunity, because at the time I was going to leave. I had, through the course of this relationship, went all the way away from my family and friends. Another pattern, by the way, here, I had started to become sequestered, from my family. Other guys weren't appropriate to talk to. Other friends were just, if they were too outspoken, other friends weren't good friends and things like that. So there was all these little ways to try and isolate a little bit. And I was very isolated. I had chosen to make myself very isolated. And at this time, I made it known that I was planning on moving. I was planning on moving back, to my home, to be with my family. And when the grandmother found this out, she started legal action against me to try and keep the grandkids for herself.
Wow, yeah.
And she had considered, I was at the time, I was making my way for myself, very young still, 20 something, but I was able to support everything. She was a multimillionaire. who had an incredible amount of resources at her disposal.
Mm.
And over the course of about 2 years, she was able to pay her way essentially into custodianship of my children.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
She had given us a house theoretically,
Mm-hmm.
and then what happened was she weaponized everything she had given
Mm.
me against me. Kind of coming into the house, sent people after me. It was almost like something you would read in a novel. It was very, when I tell people the full story, it's almost unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my first experience in discovering how the court systems can be bought.
Yeah.
It was a very, I would have never in a million years had thought that was possible. But, you know, apparently it's especially in that state of Pennsylvania, it's very, very easy to go after a single mother, I discovered.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a very long saga.
Mm-hmm.
But in the course of all of this, by 2012, she had successfully managed to claim full custodianship of them and completely shut me out of their lives.
Wow.
Completely and utterly, which, you know, combined with everything I had went through, you know, nearly broke me. It was a very, it was to the point, and again, like, I know this sounds very sensationalist, but it was to the point where it's like, if you continue, you will be killed type of, it was a very interesting, a very intense situation. And I'm going to speak for a moment from a wider perspective, because this is something, around this time, this was 2012, around this time, I remember laying on the floor of where I was and literally trying to summon a meteor to squish me. I was like, let's, you know, I mean, it's funny to think about it now, but I was like, okay, let's see if I can just make this happen. Like,
now, what do you mean? You said a meteor. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I was envisioning, like, can I use the power of my will to entice a rock to fall out of space and just centralized right on me, right on my house, just explode me, because I was done. I felt I was completely done. I had been able to extract myself from such an intense situation, you know, with my former partner, only to have everything taken. And it in the most abhorrent way I could even begin to describe. And yet at that moment, something really incredible shifted within me. And it was like I had an immediate shift experience. I remember standing, it was like I was looking over a hole or something, like a black hole, and I was looking at it and almost contemplating just falling into it. And I said, well, I remember thinking something to myself like, what's the point of living? And then it was like a voice within me that said, well, if there is no point, then why don't you make it whatever you want?
Yeah.
And there was something about that was hilarious. And I started to laugh. I'm sure to anyone on the outside, it might have looked like I was just having like a breakdown or something, but it was the funniest thought in the world. Like, here in the depth of the greatest pain, like, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. I wouldn't wish this on the people, you know, that instigated this situation. I would not wish this on anyone. And yet I was laughing and just kind of beside myself. And I realized in that moment that we have a choice in every single moment. We have a moment-to-moment choice to live life how we want, and that, yes, we may experience the most extreme traumas in our lives, but we have the opportunity to make choice with what we do with the very next step.
Right.
And there was something so incredibly liberating and empowering about that, I got up, like metaphorically, but also energetically.
Mm-hmm.
I got up, and I would say something entirely shifted for me in that experience. And I hesitate to call it an awakening experience, because it was certainly something that was maybe accelerated by the experience of extreme trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to make it clear to everyone, listening, that you don't need to have a trauma experience to have an expansion experience. And I certainly wouldn't recommend that path.
Right. And you could even, I see this happening a lot to people when they just get to a breaking point with something.
Yes.
They've been suffering for so long with whatever that is, could be, with their business, with their family, their personal relationships, with anything that they have been feeling stuck with or suffering to any capacity. And then you get to this breaking point, and then depending on your decisions that you make with that breaking point, some very powerful things can happen.
I agree. And in part, I would say it's one of those chicken and egg things, because I made the choice. I made the choice to leap, and then I became the leap. So, I believe we all have these choices. And I would also say, and again, I know this is such an experience in a nutshell, but I would say, for any of us going through these situations, I have found that the paradox that, suffering is both unnecessary and completely necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessary, for example, to seek it out, but if you are having it, there is something very beautiful and necessary about feeling it to this just uninhibited and really embracing it in that moment. And
it's like a birthing process.
Yes. Oh, what a great way to describe that. It is. And in the birthing process, you understand that almost the more you lean into that, those feelings of pain, you lean into those waves, they almost transform.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. With that, that metaphor, and I think this does apply to a lot of life situations too, is the more you lean into it and tune into it, the less it feels like pain. And the more it just feels like an experience and a sensation.
Yes. And, leaning into this, because this is such a huge path of mine I've shared with you all. And it's something that I feel, very open to share with people, but I usually do so when I feel very, very called to, because for some people it's such an extreme experience. So much to the point that, you and I were actually discussing before this call, whether this was, appropriate to share. And, but I do feel, and I want to continue, if you're tuning in here, I want to continue to share with you the depth of this experience, because this is not an experience, this is one that I continue to unfold with each day. It's one that I continue to unfold with because every single day I am connecting with my children here. Every single day. It has become through my life, from that point. So, we describe this point of almost greater insight. We describe this point of choice, where all the accumulation of the sovereign choices I've made almost came together to create this supernova of a shift. And I want to emphasize that, because it really was born of personal choice. And that is a power each one of us have. That's a power that you have. That's a power that is accessible to every single one of us, no matter where we are. And through this choice, this supernova that changed, in my personal life, I received a lot of insights, a lot of very expanded insights, which is where the books that I have written were born from, sitting in this state of expanded awareness born in forgiveness and compassion. Because my journey, this is something I'd like to share with you all, the journey that I have, that has been reflected to me through my different mentors, the guides, the shaman, the therapist, people that I've worked with on this story personally, through the years. So this has been 8 years now, since 2012. This all kind of sparks 8 years. It has been established that this experience I had was something that I chose at a very, we're going to call it expanded level, something that I chose to experience for myself, and in part was so that I could make the choice for ultimate forgiveness, not only for myself, but for everyone involved. And what I do want to say on the topic of forgiveness is forgiveness never means that you are telling other people, well, what you did was okay. It's not about permission for the other or anything like that, because that was a hard one for me. I kept thinking that if I was forgiving someone, I was on some level saying to them, oh, well, that's okay. You're allowed to do that to me.
Right.
Forgiveness, I have found, is more of a choice and a frequency. It's not something that was based in right or wrong or what people should or should not do. Forgiveness for me became a commitment to peace that was based in personal power. Forgiveness is something that starts within me and comes from an understanding that every single person I'm interacting with is acting to the best of their ability from the level of awareness and resonance they are right now. It does not mean I need to allow them to treat me in any specific way or not, but the forgiveness itself is the core, it's the seed from which I respond to everyone else. So instead of responding to someone out there as you out there, you bad aggressor, it comes from a seed of understanding. Just as you might understand that a tiger is simply there to try and eat you because that is its nature. That doesn't mean I go out there and lay down for the tiger to eat me. But I don't need to be mad. How dare you, you tiger, you. It's, it's this seed of, I see what you are. I see you. And I am at peace understanding what you are. And there is no, I do not need, there is, and what happens when I do that is there is no power anyone outside of me has over me. Not because I need to be power over them or I need to push or pull this, but because the power is within me and I am observing and discerning everyone around me. That seed allows me to make these choices. And I understand what I said, may have had a lot of these different words, but I hope the frequency of what I said is something that can sit deeply within your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more of a self-healing process.
Yes, it is. And, I have found that, there's so much we can go into forgiveness and connecting and being with everyone, but this really opens us up, that personal power combined with that forgiveness really opens us up to limitless possibilities with how we not only create with ourselves, but the kind of people that we do attract into our lives once we are operating from that choice. Because the thing I'll share with you is once I made that choice, although all this upheaval happened, it was almost like immediately I drew people into my life that resonated with a similar personal power. I drew people into my life that honored my personal power, honored who I was and what I am. And I found the current relationship, that I am in, I drew just, I know it may sound very cliche, but really, truly, my very, very best friend. And we operate from a space now of standing each in our own personal power, coming together, and we ask, well, where do we meet here so that everything is more expanded? And it's not about, to be clear, we, of course, we're human beings. We have our conflicts as well. I want to make it super duper clear. It's not like, let's all aspire to have all these things. Because what I have found is, even within my own self, being a human being, a singular, as it were, human being, I still have my own conflicts. So you bring two people within, and you're going to have that playing. But the nature of those conflicts and how we interact with ourselves and each other is the key here. It's not about being conflict free necessarily, because we are in an experience, but it is about not only the responsibility we have for our own feelings, energy, and emotions, and honoring the other people around us, but working with people who honor themselves and us as well.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put. And such a higher level of a relationship than what I think most people are used to, because it is taking personal responsibility, and you kind of need both parties for that to work. You need both parties to be able to take responsibility.
Yes, that's true.
Would you say that he's somebody who has a pattern of taking responsibility, like when you met him, or did you have to transition into that?
I would say that is, funny you say that. I think that's one of his hallmarks. If you were to have, certain traits that you would highlight on a person, you could only pick like 3 or 4. One of his would be, he is a man of integrity. And he chooses to take personal responsibility. So much so that he taught me how to take even deeper levels of personal responsibility for myself.
I talk with a lot of women who come out of relationships like what you've described, your first relationship, and they have a fear of going into relationships again. And they have this idea, a lot of them have this idea that their person needs to be perfect. There needs to be this perfection. Like if there's any flaws, that means there's going to be trouble. And what I would say is, as long as they have this quality of taking responsibility, they can grow with you, and they will grow with you, as long as they have the integrity and the willingness to grow. And you can tell, not, that's overgeneralization, but in a lot of cases you can tell that a person is willing to grow if they're willing to take responsibility. So that's one of those like positive red flags you can look for, is are they the kind of person who will take responsibility for their lives, for their actions and behaviors.
Agreed. And to go deeper into that, I can really relate, because there was, coming out of it, I was even with all my work, I definitely had a much shorter line for what I felt I would tolerate in a relationship. And fortunately my partner was someone who was very inquisitive, and if I was being reactive, would inquire with me, okay, well, do you want to explore this with me? Which was very helpful. But I think what I'm bringing up is, I completely agree with you. I have not found any wisdom in attempting to expect perfection out of relationships or out of ourselves, or really any situation, because the moment that we do, it's almost as though we're mentally anticipating what we think it should be, rather than allowing ourselves to experience the beautiful possibilities of what it is.
Yeah, I love that. That is so powerful. I feel like, especially probably the people who are watching this tend to strive for that perfection, which like you said, it's the anticipation of what could be or what should be, and just really sets the foundation for not being satisfied and for anxiety and stress around those things, and ultimately not having what you want. So what would you suggest to somebody who's going through any level, any capacity, of what you've been describing today, whether it's on the more extreme side, or maybe it's something where they can just kind of pull aspects of it and apply it to themselves? What are some last tips or wisdom that you can give our listeners?
Okay, great question. Let's tune into that. The first step in anything, any relationship or any experience you have, is to be incredibly kind and loving to yourself.
Yeah.
Every single thing you do, every single thing you create, it begins and starts within you. I call it, that seed. And it's so easy for us to have a lot of stories and ideas of who and what we should be. The more that we are not looking at that inner garden, the more we tend to project it outside of us. So the very, very, very first step is to first remember that you are right where you need to be. And I am absolutely certain, no matter what's going on, you have been doing awesome. Mm-hmm. And the next step is to remember to just unconditionally love yourself. As you mentioned, treat yourself the way you would that inner 5-year-old child. And start there. Start treating yourself impeccably over anything else. I always say there is never a good reason. There really is never a good reason to be mean to yourself. You are your best friend, your closest ally, your most unconditionally loving parent. And with every step you take to forge that relationship with yourself, you start to open yourself up to the, what I call this absolute truth that resonates inside of you, that as you cultivate, it's like a pearl, and as you cultivate this love and trust with you, this pearl shines brighter and brighter. And in all the situations of your life, your relationships, your friendships, your business decisions, you'll start to find that this pearl responds in very clear ways to these different experiences in your life. And you don't even have to try. It's so natural to you. You are just naturally that radiant. So give yourself that permission to start with just the first step of love. If you're not sure how to be loving to yourself, if that's challenging to you, I like to start sometimes by talking, to that inner child and just writing a little journal. And it doesn't have to be stoic and loving. It can be silly and playful. You know the best way to love yourself. And play with that. And if it seems silly at first, it's okay. Play some more. We're all very silly. We're very silly people, creatures, beings in this planet. And I have every absolute bit of confidence that you will experience what you want most in life, because you are just, every single one of you listening are such incredible, powerful, dynamic beings. And I wish you could see yourself too that way that you truly are, because you would never, ever, 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 ever doubt again what you are capable of and how worthy of love you are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Perfect last words for our session today. So Danielle, how can people get a hold of you if they want to ask you questions, or if they want to, I'm sure some people would like to share some of their story with you. Is there a way?
Yes. What they can do is they can reach me on my website, daniellelynn.com, DanielleLynn.com. At the moment of recording this, I'm on Facebook, so if they look me up at Danielle Lynn, they're welcome to add me or send me a message if they feel inspired. And those are the two best ways to kind of
Awesome.
connect with me. I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions, or if you feel like sharing something, please do reach out. I'm very open to that.
You know, a lot of people feel when they see something like this that the other person isn't going to be accessible, or they think they'll bother them or something like that. But it sounds like you're very open
Yes,
to hearing people's stories and to answering questions. So that's
please.
wonderful. And I'll add you to currently, as we're recording this, I have a group called The Vibrant Life, and I'll add you to that group so that you can, people can openly ask questions in there as well.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And for our audience today, go check out Danielle's books. Remind us the titles and where we can find your books.
27 Soul Perspectives and Eclipse of Consciousness. I recommend 27 Soul Perspectives to everyone and anyone who wants to shift their perspectives. It's a fantastic tool.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, Eclipse of Consciousness, see if it's something that calls to you. That one's a very unique book, but I say to people, if you feel drawn to it, it's for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being just completely vulnerable with us today. I have a feeling that this has been a healing experience for some people, an eye-opening, enlightening, and self-reflection kind of experience for a lot of people today. So we all really appreciate that, and look forward to there's a lot of topics I feel like we'll be able to expand on in future episodes. So looking forward to that as well.
Sounds amazing. Thank you again so much. It was a wonderful, wonderful honor to share this with you and everyone.
Yes, me too. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.